Hello there. Hello there, and I do hope you're all well. Right, can anybody hear me? Hello there, hello there. Is anybody hear me? Just to let me know, I don't want to be talking to myself. Yes. Thank God for that. I managed, 5 minutes out of time, but God, how. Hey up, I'm glad to see you all. Who we got in? The lefty boat, how are you doing here? Ben Shaw, hope you're well. Chatty Rat, good evening. And Mellow Maggie, good to see you, how are you doing? And 91 Leeds, pleasure to see you. Yes, I'm very well. I'm even better now that I've got this right. Makes a bloody change. Right, less of my rabbiting on. Right, this is a Home Affairs Committee meeting which started, I think it was the day before Her Royal Highness passed away, and this was about violence towards young women and young girls, specifically towards people who were seeking asylum and things like that. And when I watched it, I found it very, very interesting, very, very interesting, and not just that. The two young ladies who were being asked the questions, wow, the fantastic work these two do is absolutely breathtaking. So, without further ado, I'll let the young ladies introduce themselves, and if you're unsure, the names and what they do were in the description box anyway. So anyway, less of my babbling on. Enjoy. These two are fantastic. You're live.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. We're starting slightly earlier this morning, but a very warm welcome to everybody to the Home Affairs Select Committee. This session this morning is part of our inquiry into violence against women and girls, which is an overarching inquiry that we've been undertaking for some time now. The aim of this session, we're particularly looking at domestic abuse and to get a further understanding of the support that should be in place for migrant victims and survivors of domestic abuse and the particular challenges that they face in accessing that support. We want to find out more about the Support for Migrant Victims scheme and the possible outcomes from that, and to explore the outcome of the super complaint brought by Southall Black Sisters and Liberty on policing and immigration status. So we're very pleased to have our first panel with us this morning, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and say the organisation that you represent. So, Nicole, would you like to start?
Sure, good morning. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm Nicole Jacobs. I'm the Domestic Abuse Commissioner for England and Wales. And by way of background, I've worked for over 25 years in mainly frontline domestic abuse services in the UK. And some initiatives which have touched upon help for and support for migrant survivors, but in post we've been creating quite a policy focus in my office on what I see as quite a gap in provision. So it's a policy priority and some work that I'll talk about this morning with you.
Thank you very much. Vicky.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invite to give evidence. I work for an organisation in Manchester called Safety for Sisters. I'm the interim director, and the service is to support migrant women who are facing domestic abuse and have no recourse to public fund. Safety for Sisters was set up in 2009 as a campaigning group around no recourse, and we began delivering services in 2014, and we were doing frontline work trying to find emergency accommodation for women, but also giving them emotional support through group work. And in 2020, we set up our specialist no recourse public fund refuge, which was in the middle of COVID in response to the extreme situations migrant women were finding themselves in.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I wondered if we could just sort of set the scene about how migrant women, and I want to deal with that as well, because I want to be clear that domestic abuse is gendered, isn't it? And the vast majority of the people we're talking about are women. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I think that's quite important that we say that. But could both of you just kind of set the scene for who these women, mainly women, are? What happens to them if they are suffering from domestic abuse? What's the kind of the picture that we need to be made aware of, and the gaps in the services that you're trying to fill? So perhaps if you could start, Nicole, that would be helpful.
Sure. Well, I suppose when we say migrant victims of domestic abuse, as you say, we are often talking about women, although of course there are men who are victims of domestic abuse, and I do consider that part and parcel of my role as Domestic Abuse Commissioner to represent all victims of domestic abuse, or give them a voice. And not represent them or feel I could possibly myself. But for migrant survivors, particularly, we're talking about people with a range of different status. So it's a kind of a catch-all, but it could be a student, it could be someone who is here on a spousal visa, it could be someone who is here visiting family. There's a range of people that we will see, and Vicky, I'm sure, will tell you in much more detail, that would find themselves in a situation where they either have no recourse to public funds, and what that means, it doesn't mean they couldn't go to a domestic abuse service. It means that the options that are available for that service will be very limited. So, as Vicky said, particularly not having recourse to public funds because of an immigration status really affects, obviously, your housing option. So refuge becomes a very difficult option to access. But a whole host of other things. So when I was a frontline worker, it was very difficult. Anyone who came with their children to my office said they weren't safe to go home. It was very difficult to think about what are the options right now that would help them, because nothing unlocks. It's challenging in normal circumstances, but unlocking what the options could become very, very difficult. On top of that, you have immigration abuse. So in other words, the perpetrator, who often is a British citizen, we have to point out, will be giving false information to that victim, will be withholding information, will be purposefully doing things that would keep control of that victim. So there's an awful lot of abuse that takes place where victims will come forward after years, maybe to a health professional, for example, or someone who they may have very slowly been able to get to know, maybe the police, in an emergency, and they will have all sorts of misconceptions about what will happen to them, what will happen to their children, fears of so many fears that are real and fears that have been imposed by the perpetrator, where there's not an ability to kind of understand what's correct about what's been told to them and what's not. A third issue is that lack of the buy-in for provision. So provision like Safety for Sisters, which I've had the pleasure of visiting, and I can tell you it was one of the most inspirational days I've had as commissioner, the extraordinary work that Vicky and her team do. That is a very rare provision. I mean, it is what Vicky does and her team does not exist in most areas of England and Wales. It's quite unusual, which is why I wanted to see it so badly. And so the options of seeking support are very, very limited. And when you do have, and this is my fourth and last point, and I'll hand over to you, Vicky, is a lot of times people who are interacting with services, whether it's domestic abuse services more generally, a housing officer, a GP, a social worker, if they even get that far to disclose or that domestic abuse is identified, that person's understanding of what options are available can be quite limited. And what we see in the some of the facts and figures that we do have is how often victims are told they don't have options when they actually do. So, for example, if they're on a spousal visa and there are options, people of all sorts of frontline services misunderstand and misinform the victim. So there's just layers upon layers of obstacles for migrant victims. And the good news is, I think we can solve them, and that's why I'm really pleased to be here and talking to you today. I think there is a will and an ability to solve these problems. So,
just before Vicky comes in, I just want to check with you. The issue around no recourse to public funds, people not being eligible to apply for those, is on the basis that when people come to this country on a visa, as a student, for example, they are supposed to have sufficient funds to support themselves. So that's the whole rationale behind no recourse to public funds, isn't it?
It is, and of course that's true, and that's right. But when you look at through the lens of domestic abuse and our Domestic Abuse Act, which created my role, for example, the definition, now our legal definition of domestic abuse includes and understands the context of coercion and control, financial abuse. And so it's clear to all of us, I think, that even if someone once did have an ability to support themselves, once you add the controlling nature of domestic abuse, that is often out of their control. And so you find yourself destitute, you find yourself in situations that you weren't at all anticipating.
Yeah, thank you. Vicky.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Nicole has said. I think the barriers come when a woman is actually in the relationship and trying to leave, but also when she leaves that relationship. As Nicole has said, the abusers often use immigration as a control. So they abuse the woman and they say, if you go to the police, they'll take you to the Home Office, or you will be detained, deported. And often she doesn't know what her rights are, so she believes him. And the statistics bear out that migrant women stay longer in relationships and they don't leave until it becomes absolutely horrific and desperate. Because one thing they fear quite often, more than the violence of the man, is being deported, because when they go back to their home countries and they've left their husbands or their partners, they're in danger from his extended family and sometimes their own. So there's the fear keeps them there, and that's backed up and used by the abuser. The other point is that obviously they're no recourse to public funds, more than often dependent on the partner financially, and they know if they leave they'll have absolutely no income, so they're facing destitution and homelessness, and that is enough to keep, as it would for any of us, to keep them from actually leaving. And then the hostile environment within the community kind of backs that up, that they know if they leave, the likelihood is whether they sound or look like a migrant, they're going to be picked up and asked for their ID. And this is the sort of environment if they leave, they would come out of maybe a community that is surveillancing them as a woman in that relationship, but also is their support. So there's a lot of decisions they have to make, and they have to be extremely courageous to leave that violence, as bad as it is. And unfortunately, what we found is through the women's experience that they've talked to us about and that we witness, is when they do leave, some of these barriers play out for real. So they go to the housing office and they say, sorry, you know, recourse, you don't qualify for homelessness services. So to give you some examples, some of the women that we've had referred into our service have been sleeping rough in parks. We've had a woman who was actually sleeping rough in a park, and she had a kidney problem. And so both the housing and the social services said, sorry, recourse, we can't help you. She was fleeing domestic abuse. So we went to, in our advocacy role, we went to social services, and shockingly, they said, well, the park's next to a 24-hour McDonald's and they've got toilets. So we did challenge them and we won, and eventually they put her up in accommodation. But this is the sort of thing that women are up against for services. And as Nicole said, quite often frontline services, housing, social services, sometimes the police, sometimes refugees, don't understand, and they think either all women are asylum seekers or they're all no recourse, and they tend to panic because it's immigration, and immigration is scary. Of the 196 women who rang us, and we have 2 part-time advocates, we're a very small team. We had 147 that refused refuge space last year. And we felt the reason that we set up the refuge and that we set up our services is we felt this was not acceptable. We've also had women turning to the police who've then been taken straight to the Home Office. We've had women being told, can you not? And in the pandemic, a woman was told, sorry, we can't move you out of the house by the police because of COVID. And the same woman was told by social services, can you not live in another part of the house? So it's a mixture of not understanding the women's rights, not having the resources to do something for the women because they can't get housing benefit to get her into safe accommodation. And they all play out. And I've had women said to me, I feel like I'm not worth anything. My life I'm not worth the safety. And they see it. They get moved from different social services across social services boundaries. And we had a woman who we put up in a bed and breakfast for a week while 2 different local authorities argued out whose responsibility she was. And she had a child.
Right, thank you very much.
Jesus Christ, that was just gut-wrenching to listen to. I listened to it before I listened at second time. That was just gut-wrenching. You ever say feeling worthless? Good God. Sorry if I said it wrong, I do apologise. Yeah, no problems. Yeah, that's the reason why I thought this is well worth it. What these women do is absolutely fantastic. Where would these women in that position be if it weren't for people like these? Magnificent.
We're going to move to James Daly.
Well, first of all, Vicky, can I say thank you very much for everything that you're doing, because you're doing more than anybody in this room to address this problem and to touch people's lives. So we all owe you a massive debt of gratitude in respect to what you're doing. I'm the MP for Bury North, so we're not a million miles apart in terms of the services that you're doing. Nicole didn't mean it, I don't think, this way, but I don't have a positive view on the services for victims of domestic violence in any way, shape or form, whatever their background. I think in general there is obviously some good provision. I'm sure colleagues in various councils could point to something good that's happening, but it's general all over this country. The standard of support for victims of domestic violence, apologies, I can't work my phone, so is absolutely abysmal. In my view, there's no other word. It is abysmal. It is appalling, and so your enthusiasm, Nicole, saying we can sort this out, I think that's a big statement, and I'm sure you're going to tell my colleagues exactly how we're going to do that, but it's not working at this moment in time. I wanted to ask a simplistic question, and please forgive me in respect of this, because I'm going to use I was a criminal defence lawyer for a long time. I've been involved in this sector for a very long time. If you are a victim of domestic violence in Bury, you have there is virtually no one to turn to. There are no services, no matter what your background. So in a very simplistic way, Vicky, it's not a simplistic issue because every victim of domestic violence is different. Migrant victims of domestic violence compared to, I hate to use this word, is it non-migrant or whatever the correct term is it the public funds issue that's the difference if you get away from the actual personal circumstances? Is that what's setting those, a difference between those two? Or are victims of domestic violence going through these things that we're talking about here today, no matter what their immigration status?
I think that the main problem is they do not have access to safe accommodation. So be that a refuge, be that social services, if they are no recourse to public funds. And so a British woman who leaves her partner can go to the housing office, the homelessness department, and say, I'm a victim of domestic violence. In fact, she can go to any local authority in the country for her safety and say, I'm a victim of domestic violence, I need safe accommodation. And she may not get refuge because there's not enough refuge spaces around, but she would be put up in bed and breakfast or safe accommodation. The issue for migrant women is because they can't access housing benefit, that refugees can't take them, social services can't pay for them to go in bed and breakfast, and actually, legally, homelessness services don't have a responsibility unless they've got children.
So could I ask you a question about you use refuge, a safe space, whatever we want to describe it as. The scale of the problem of that type of accommodation, I think, is all over the country, and we need to do that. One of the most basic things that you would, and you've talked about this, is we need to encourage the building, the construction, the purchase, whatever you want to call it, in every council area of sufficient accommodation to deal and to allow victims of domestic violence a safe space that they can go to stay until they have got their affairs in order, or whatever the correct term is. Would that be a good starting point to this?
It would be a good starting point if migrant women had access to them, even if you had lots of refugees.
I meant that.
Yeah.
Forgive me,
Yeah.
I meant that.
I think also there is a massive need for buying for services, specialist services, because we provide a holistic approach. So we have partnerships with immigration lawyers. We look wider than the immediate violence. So we look at the extended family, violence from outside the country, issues of culture and community. We have money for interpreters, not all refugees can afford that. We have a specialist counsellor, we have specialist group work. So we look at the whole picture, and one of the needs in refugees, one, to have specialist services, but also for the mainstream refugees to look at providing interpreters. Sometimes Safety for Sisters have to pay for women to go from where they are to a taxi to the refuge, and then we pay for the refuge because refugees don't have the funds for a taxi, they don't have interpreters, so we pay for interpreters. So there's huge problems in the mainstream, but there's also an increasing need, and specialist services for black and minoritized women have been cut drastically compared to mainstream services. And these are the ones that once the woman, if we had a system where the woman could access benefits, then we would want specialist services properly funded.
There's two final questions. The first one is that migrant women are at a far higher risk of, in my view, sexual exploitation within the criminality, should we say it like that. It's not necessarily abuse within a domestic setting, it's general abuse within criminal gangs and exploitation such as that. I just wonder if you could give us a viewpoint on what can be done in respect to people who are going through that misery, and whether that presents any separate challenges to some of the things you've been talking about.
I think if women are going into refuges and they're specialist refuges, the workers have the networks and the training to be able to get the support that's needed for those women to stay safe. I think that is part and parcel of the support that is offered.
Do you think the police are doing enough to be a sort of conduit between the victims of abuse in that setting and the services that are there potentially to help them? Vicky, you talked very, very articulately and passionately about that some victims of migrant domestic abuse or abuse in general are not aware of the services and potentially the support that they are. If somebody is being held against their will in a setting, that they perhaps don't have have, I mean, Nicole, you might want to answer this, but don't have, strong, when English is not their first language, the police surely have got a role to play in terms of really being strong and positive and trying to get along over some of the, some of the messaging that some services hopefully are available, and you can go and take advantage of those. Is that right, Nicole? Is that right?
Can I just say one thing?
That
one of the problems we face, or that migrant women face, is the inconsistency of the police. Yeah. For some women, they get a good service. Other women, they don't. And if we could recommend and support the police, or support the woman and say, yes, if you go to the police, you'll get this, this and this. But at the moment, we're not able to do that because it's ad hoc.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that, because there is not a firewall in place, there's a real concern from a migrant victim to go to seek the police support. So we know that that's the case, and I'm sure we'll come to that. But also, it is very inconsistent, what you could expect. There's been a huge amount of work that my office has been involved with, and other people here, in working with government about what to do about any number of these issues. And the one thing I can say that they can be quite, there's a lot to cover in meetings and lots of different angles people take. But the one thing everyone agrees on all the time is that the police really would benefit with having more organizations like Safety for Sisters in their local area. Everyone hands down agrees to that, and the government's response on some of these things formally says that, but the trouble is we don't see it. There's no direct plan for that happening yet. And I just wanted, if you would allow, I'd love to come back to just to stay at the beginning part of your question. I would say I would agree with you to some extent about the variability of domestic abuse services, but we'd have to remember that part of that variability comes from the fact that they don't ever, these services have never sat in core budgets. Our first refuges were upwards of 50 years ago. Our first, 2020, or, what Vicky was talking about, 2010, developing some of these services. So what we're mapping in my office, and also I'd love to send this to the committee if you're interested, is, we're mapping all services in England and Wales just to show the variability. So I think, when you potentially are picking up negative kind of views potentially about what services are available, the fundamental question is, well, why do we have the variability? And it's because these services have always sat on the outside of core budgets, not sustainably funded. That's a big driver in my office. Layer on top of that the buy and for services, and in our mapping shows that they're 5 times less likely to receive statutory funding, any kind of government funding. They're much more vulnerable to have shut down, as Vicky said, in the last 10 years. And you see, some of our mapping, shows that while you've got domestic abuse services in the last years who've said 25% of which have said, yes, we've had to make some cuts to our services. Why? Again, because they're not sitting in core budgets. They're not highly protected. They're doing the best they can, and they are variable. But the buy and for services, the services more like Vicky and others that you'll hear today, were 42% likely to say that they've had to shut down services because of cuts. It is just absolutely clear, the evidence, that we have a lot to do for services in general, a lot more to do for buy and for services.
Cool. My question was on the basis, when I was saying about it's the lack of service, not the standard of service. The work that's going on is incredible where it is. It's the fact that we don't have the investment and the facilities in the areas. And if you don't have that, that's why, in my view, the service provided to some of the most vulnerable people in this country is appallingly bad, and it deserves huge investment to make sure that they've got the support they need.
And one of the things that we've surveyed, we did a general population survey of survivors of domestic abuse in England and Wales who were seeking services in the last 5 years, and we'll send you this as part of our mapping briefing. And one of the key things that they say is, the ones that were able to access services, absolutely, you see the difference in their feelings of safety, feelings of having control over their lives once they've had that contact. So I think there's plenty of evidence that these services work, but we need to move to a much more sustainable picture.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I didn't want to butt in and tell, because this fantastic young lady were in fast, she's brilliant. But I just want to say hello to late stragglers. Good evening, Alistair, Suzanne DeWitt, and Duke Vengeance, spot on. That would require the Tories to not be libertarian. Spot on. Totally agree with that. And Audrey, welcome aboard. It's good to see you. I always look forward to your hello, good morning, and love and light, and it's good to see you here. Right, less of my rabbiting on. Let's listen to these fantastic young ladies.
Sorry, can I just be clear? Is the mapping exercise completed? Have you now got a map of what provision there is in England?
We have. It's completed, and we're publishing. We'll be publishing a report in October. Right. I'm sure I'd love to come back and talk to any number of you and in any committees about the mapping. And what we're trying to show is where those discrepancies are, but also what survivors themselves say they want and what are they actually getting. And there's some pretty big disparities there.
And that covers England and Wales?
It covers England and Wales. And while I'm, what do we do about that? What I believe is that we have a victims bill, I hope, that will be able to impact some of these things. There's some opportunities in the victims bill to address those gaps in services, and particularly buy and for. One way that I feel buy and for services lose out at the local level is that they're not, unless they're in a larger place like Manchester, and still that's tough, I can tell you, I'm sure Vicky can tell you, the local commissioning landscape makes it very difficult for a buy and for service like Vicky's, or LGBT service, or deaf and disabled service. You can go on and on. They get often squeezed out of those local commissioning arrangements. So while I'd like to strengthen those, I think we need to acknowledge we have to have a national funding pot for buy and for services where you can have some real kind of regional, national planning. Imagine, a service like Vicky's having the capability to help capacity build, help bring services, raise the kind of quality of services. And that won't ever be planned at the local level. We have to plan that nationally. And so that's what I mean. There's some things we can do that I think are very practical that would really help move the dial on this quite considerably.
Okay, thank you. Diane Abbott.
This is a question for Vicky, really. How is your organisation funded?
Good question. At the moment, we've got 9 different streams of funding, which all need reports, which all need starting different times of the year, not necessarily our financial year. So we have private funds, private grant makers like the Oglesby Trust, the Tudor Trust, Sisters Fund. We have had money from Comic Relief through the Change Makers. We apply to the Victim Support Fund at the moment, the pilot project. So we get some money reimbursed for the refuge. For the second year running, we're just about to go into our second year of funding from Manchester City Council and Greater Manchester Combined Authorities, which is very new for us. And the rest we fundraise for, and we're continually looking for new pots of funding, because as you can imagine, if we're funding women in a bed and breakfast, we're talking £350 a week, and if Man United or Man City are playing at home, the hotel price is triple. And
sorry, but that is shocking. Is that they're having to scrimp and scrape for funding for something that's really important? Well, it's because it is really. These women need all the help, and these people having to scrimp and scrape for whatever money they can get, for funding. 12 years of Tory government for you. shameful.
And we're funding women in refuges, sometimes pre-DDV concession so that the refuges will take them, and sometimes because they aren't on spousal visas and they don't qualify for the DDV concession. I don't think we've talked about the DDV concession, but I presume we're going on to that. So it's a mixture, and it is exhausting keeping going.
You've touched on the sort of support that you offer victims of domestic abuse within secure immigration status. Mm-hmm. But do you want to give us an overall picture of the type of support you offer?
Yeah, okay. So from when we get a call and it's a woman who's fleeing domestic abuse and she's told us on the phone that she's no recourse to public funds, the housing aren't able to do anything for her, she hasn't got care needs, she hasn't got children, and so she's basically quite often walking the street or walking to the next place that somebody has signposted to her. She's quite often in a dangerous situation, so the first thing we would do would be to get her to safety. So we would get probably a taxi to our office if necessary, if we can't do it over the phone. Sometimes we give her immediate support, physical support, so we might have to give her food, we might have to give her clothes, we might have to give her a new SIM card if he's trying to track her, or a new phone. As I said before, we work in conjunction with Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit in partnership, so we try to get her immigration advice independent as soon as possible so that she knows what her options are. And quite often we find that services, like I say, have guessed her status, and we might find that she's actually not no recourse public fund and that she does have recourse. So it's important that she hears that from a solicitor, and maybe the only option available to her would be to claim asylum because she's too frightened to go back to her own country. And so if that's the case, we might support her to go to the Home Office to claim asylum, and we write evidence for the set DV application if she's going through the spousal route, the DDV concession and the set DV routes. We would take the evidence, so we would also do a risk assessment, send her case to the MARAC if that's necessary, put in place all the safeguarding. And if we had space in our refuge, we obviously put her in a refuge. We also, so that's kind of the immediate things, and we'd get interpreters. We have access to interpreters. Sometimes the only thing, because she's been through so many services and she's been passed from pillar to post, that everybody's so concerned about her immigration, they actually forget she's in trauma and that she's suffered domestic abuse. So we sit her down, give her the safe space to listen to her and to tell her story and to listen to what her safety issues are, which maybe she hasn't given a. For example, we had a woman who didn't give a statement to the police. The police thought she was being uncooperative, but actually her mum was in Pakistan living in her partner's family's house, and if she gave a statement to the police, they'd threaten to evict her mother. So it's complicated. There's all sorts of issues that come up. So we also provide group work. So we have specialist group work. We have a wellbeing group for women who have most recently come into fled domestic abuse. We have a writing group so that women have the chance to put down their experiences, and they've actually started doing public performances, their poetry and their writings, to give them self-confidence back and self-determination of their own lives, because so often their experience as services is similar to the experiences that their abuser has held them down, made them feel like they're not worth anything, and then the services who refuse make them feel that again. So it's about her building up her confidence again and being able to feel confident to make her own choices. We also get access to ESOL classes if they haven't had the chance to. Quite a lot of abusers stop women getting English lessons. We also have a social group, and we have a specialist counsellor for migrant women, and we always offer, we're about to start offering a therapy group. So we do both practical and emotional. And then on top of that, as Nicole knows, we support women to go beyond and be able to talk about their experiences, also give evidence to reports and research, and raise awareness. And we also do training to all different organisations. We did a set of training last year to both voluntary and statutory agencies on best practice, and we use examples and case studies from women that have been through our service.
Thank you.
And we do campaigning. As today.
I just wanted to ask Vicky, actually, what is your view of the government decision not to establish a firewall between the police and immigration enforcement?
I know some of my colleagues are going to talk more on this, but from our experience, I'll do a statistic that of the 196 women who came through our service last year, only 57 engaged with the police. And I think that's a lot to do with their fear of, and the perpetrators reinforce this, that the police will share their information with the Home Office and that they will face detention and deportation. We have had a case where a woman was taken by the police when she called the police, that they, as I said, they took her straight to the Home Office in Liverpool without any independent immigration advice. So I think if it's not clear that there is a firewall and the police don't make it clear to women, then they will not use the police, or they will be reluctant and frightened to use the police except in very extreme circumstances. So if there's any ambiguity well further down the line, or if you go through the criminal justice system, they need to be 100% sure when they call the police out, their information isn't going to the Home Office.
And a further question for Vicky is, because obviously you're working at Grassroots on this, what more should the police and immigration enforcement do to ensure victims and survivors with insecure immigration status feel they can approach the police?
Well, I think a firewall, first of all. I think also there needs to be consistency, because we've had women tell us that the police have come out and said, "Can you come back? Can you come to the office? Can you come to the police station?" 3 days later, when we've got an interpreter, and left her in the situation. As I said before, we've had the woman that was told that she couldn't leave because of COVID. We have police taking them out of the abusive situation and taking them to relatives and friends who they're asked in front of the relative and friend, is it safe for you to stay here? And sometimes it isn't, but the woman doesn't feel able to say anything. So I think the police need an understanding of domestic abuse. They need a wider understanding of the implications of, for example, taking a woman to relatives. Sometimes we can't guarantee that the police will take the woman out of the situation and talk to her alone, especially if she has language difficulties. It's easier for the abuser, who's, in one instance, he was round the corner in the house, or to take over and take control of that dialogue with the police. And if they haven't immediately got interpreters, they might turn to him, and he might have a more convincing story, and he might be better at English. So there's lots of barriers. If the police had an understanding of the barriers, that would help. In Manchester, we've just started doing we haven't actually started it, but we planned it, and we start it next month to do training with the police. And we've made recommendations, and we will be talking them through the barriers. The basic one is their role is to get that woman safe, to safety.
Just Just finally, do you deal with victims of modern slavery?
We could do, but we haven't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Can I reiterate James Jolly's comments about how we need more of these facilities? I just want to get an understanding, what's the status of the women that you are dealing with in terms of their reliance on their abusive partner for being in the country or for whatever application for settled status they might be going through? I can see absolutely in the short term they need to be a place of safety, be it a refuge or with whatever support services. But in the longer term, what's the aim? What's the intention for women are wanting to stay here permanently or for a prescribed time because it's part of studies or whatever? What is the status of the women largely you're dealing with?
It varies. So a lot of the women come over as dependents on a spousal visa. Yeah, so they're dependent on the husband for the 5 years, and then they have a route to indefinite leave to remain. So if during that 5 years there's domestic abuse and they leave, then they are no longer seen as being on that spouse visa because they're not dependent. So that's why the domestic abuse, the DDV concession was brought in, so that they can then claim, they can have some funding temporarily while they get limited leave, and then they put their application in for the domestic abuse rule, under the domestic abuse rule. So they would continue, in a way, I suppose, their route to indefinite leave to remain. So they had that right when they came to join their husband, and it's only the domestic abuse that stopped them doing that. For other women, say we have women that have maybe come over with a husband and the husband is on a business visa. So if she leaves him, she has no route to safety. If she leaves him, then she has no recourse to public funds and she's homeless and destitute. It might be that the woman has come over as a student and has met somebody who she then moves in with, and the guy says, "Don't worry, I'll sort out your immigration status." She leaves college, and so if there's then violence, she leaves. She has no recourse to public funds. She might be on a visitor visa. She might be, for a woman that. Can I give you a case history? Have we got time for the case history? Okay, we had a Nigerian woman who was, needed to get out of Nigeria. She was being persecuted, facing violence from her family because of her sexuality. They had seen her together with her girlfriend. She came over on a visitor visa. She didn't know about claiming asylum. She had no idea. So she came over to visit her sister. So she stayed with her sister, but obviously she had no income. The sister struggled. The sister kicked her out. She was on the street, no recourse to public funds. And she met this guy who said, "I'll give you a roof over your head." So she went with him. And eventually the visitor visa ran out. He said, "Don't worry about it. We'll sort out your visa. I'll sort out your visa." But he became violent. Increasingly violent, and she became pregnant. She didn't know who to turn to. She went to the hospital and actually had a miscarriage because of his violence, but unfortunately she didn't have any safe space to tell the hospital staff. He came in, made sure she didn't. She returned to that after the miscarriage, and then the next episode of violence was so severe that she called the police, ran out the house. The police came, they arrested him. She went, and they took her to the council hostel where she could stay overnight only because she was no recourse. They couldn't keep her in a room, so she stayed on a bed. They told her to go to the local authority homelessness service. She went there, they said, recourse, we can't do anything, go to social services. She didn't have any money, she was in a bad way because of the miscarriage. So she actually tried to walk to social services, didn't make it, collapsed, and a guy on the street said, "Can I help you?" He gave her a phone, said, "You can come and stay with my sister." She didn't know him, but luckily for her, and it could have turned very nasty, it didn't. She went back to his sister, I think it was. So she went to his sister's house, and with the phone that they'd given her, she was given, when she was at the council hostel, a number for Immigration Aid Unit. So she rang Immigration Aid Unit, who we work in partnership with, and she came to us. And the first thing we did was get her off the streets, because she had had no further contact with the police, and she didn't know whether the abuser was still running around looking for her. So this is, I know I'm diverting from what you're saying originally, but the first thing we did was give her food. She hadn't eaten.
It's an interesting and drastic case. I'm
just going to point out, God, wasn't she incredibly lucky, that guy who took her to his sister? They could have been anybody, couldn't they? Jesus Christ, that's heartbreaking.
More looking at those who are reliant on a partner to be here, which wasn't that case. What does having children with that partner, how does that alter their status?
It doesn't alter their status, but it well, sometimes it can do further down the line if they get immigration advice. But for if a woman is leaving and she has children, under the Children's Act, social services have to give her emergency accommodation, and the same as if she has care needs under the Care Act. They would have to give her temporary accommodation while they're assessing her. Because there's
a duty of care to the children, not to
exactly.
her. So if the partner kept the children against her will or whatever, then she would lose that recourse protection under the Children Act as well.
Would. In fact, we had a woman that went to social services, and her British father kept the baby. She was actually breastfeeding the baby, but he kept the baby, and social services turned around and said, "We don't have a duty." And she was actually we got in contact with her through social services, because the only thing they could offer her was a men's night shelter, and she actually slept in the dorm one end she was one end and the men were the other. So that basic sometimes.
Social services assessed that there was no cause for concern, even though she was breastfeeding, and presumably wanted to take her baby with her. Well, eventually
they did when we did the advocacy, but originally she had gone to social services. They had turned her away. We didn't get in contact with her for 6 weeks, when another social worker said, "We've got this woman in the night shelter, can you help her?" And by that time, 6 weeks later...
Can I just reinforce that even with the Children's Act, and you assume those provisions are in place, it's very, very hit and miss. And a lot of times advocates like Vicky have to get involved and really make sure that is provided, that kind of support. And it's also very short term, so sometimes 3 months sounds a long time. It's not, when you think of the barriers involved and the kind of work that needs to be put in. So even when children's social care does say, in the best case scenario, we'll provide 3 months of support, some refugees will think, well, what do we do after the 3 months? Because we know good and well that we will be needing to carry on. They don't want to put someone out on the street in the middle of being supported. So they will appreciate that they're taking a risk for their own financial well-being of the charity. So it's just the barriers of that no recourse create so much more work and obstacle, obviously, and heartache.
In that case, when we did the advocacy, social service eventually gave her the child back, because the child was British, actually, and so her route to staying in the country was actually because she had a British child with a husband. Yeah.
Final question, just in terms of the sort of the short-term solutions to this. Obviously, there are now greater rights for women who are British citizens escaping domestic violence in terms of access to services and safe houses, etc., etc. Would a solution to this, notwithstanding no recourse to public funds status, and that becomes sort of complicated as to whether you just do a whole-scale change of that, but discretionary funding for local authorities to be able to fund refuge places or refuge outreach services, because it might be more appropriate for women not to be in a refuge, particularly if it's for a longer space of time, but absolutely for all the sorts of support services which you described that you offer, Vicky, that local authorities were given a discretionary fund whereby women in these quite explicit circumstances who don't qualify for public funds but are clearly in urgent need of a safe place and support could be able to dish them out on an as and when basis. Is that one possibility in the short term in order to give immediate help to women in those positions?
Yes, I mean, I'll take this opportunity to tell you about a report that we're tabling in coming weeks. So I said earlier, one of our policy areas that we focus on is this area in the Commissioner's office, and we asked the London School of Economics, the Oxford Migrant Observatory to answer some questions that we would obviously have that would need to be answered to create solutions. So how many people are we talking about? What if we extended that DDVC concession to a wider range of visa holders? All of those questions. And unfortunately, I can't, because we haven't tabled it to Parliament, I have been holding back a little bit of the detail of that in this session, but I absolutely will send it. You'll be the first people. I'll send this to, and we are holding an event in Parliament on the 21st of September. And my aim in doing that is to answer those questions so we can move ahead. Because I think you're exactly right. There's absolutely a few key things we could do that would really prevent these kinds of situations happening. And rightfully, decision makers need to know, well, how many people are we talking about? How much might that cost? And one of the things that we've done in our report is a cost benefit over 10 years. And what it shows, in a lot more detail, I hope you'll hear, but it shows what I saw when I went to Safety for Sisters, which is what is the outcome when you talk to people who've been through all of those horrendous circumstances but then are properly supported. And the people I met who had those experiences were volunteering, they were starting to get into work activities, they were really contributing to society here. And that is what the cost benefit that we found in this report will show us, is that with some investment now, it not only is morally the right thing to do, and it prevents all of this heartache and crisis and trauma, but there is a benefit to us all over 10 years, and it shows in this research evidence that we will, society as a whole benefits. So I'll look forward to sharing that with you, and I hope that this will give you some really good context so when you do have that report in front of you,
Thank you.
We look forward to remember what Vicky has told you today.
Yeah, we look forward to getting a copy of that report, and that'll be very helpful. Lee Anderson.
Now, I know you've heard the name Lee Anderson, 30p day man, but don't get your high horses up. It'd be totally different. And in actual fact, when I watched this, my first thought, well, they commented him on asking a very good question, so you'll be very surprised in a bit.
Thank you, Chair. I think my first question is to Vicky, and thanks for coming, ladies. I guess many years ago, when I worked at Citizens Advice Bureau, we had numerous domestic violence cases come in, but, to be fair, in my area, it was pretty simple. The process was simple. You came to see me, we made a referral to Women's Aid or whoever the local charity was that was then in the system, and then they moved on because people knew where to come. They knew where to come. But it's different for your service users because many of them don't speak English, I would imagine, or the command of English is very, very poor. They live in a community where they don't probably see that many people or have friends or family. How do they know who you are and where you are?
Through our networking, and we would like more money to do outreach training in community
groups. Can you
groups.
explain networking? Because I'm a little bit confused on
Okay.
that. How does
So for the
that where you are?
Okay, so we in the way that we have links with the homeless hostel, the Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit, community groups, and women by word of mouth sometimes. In those communities, the police, different agencies know where we are, and sometimes it's just women go on our website and read that we provide a service for women at no recourse.
That's a pretty broad answer. I'm still a little bit concerned about that answer. So would you say there's a lot of people that don't see who you are and where you are, and they're missing out on this vital help?
Because we're completely underfunded. We've got 4 workers and we don't have time. We would love to. We've been to one Syrian group in the last year to talk about women's rights and to explain what their rights are and who we are. If we could do that across Greater Manchester, actually we wouldn't be able to cope with the number of women that come to us. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, I guess back in the day we used to call this mail order brides, but we see a lot of men in this country now, they're sort of importing their brides from around the world, whether that be the Philippines, whether that Thailand. We see Eastern Europe now. And I suppose we've got a lot of young ladies coming in, a lot of young women coming in who are actually coming to the unknown really, and they could be facing pretty much anything when they get to this country. And I know we've got something in this country called Clare's Law, where a potential partner can actually check out their future spouse. Is that something that's made available or promoted to, or should it be made available or promoted to women coming in from abroad so they can check out where they're going?
I think that's a very good idea, and so it could happen, and I would say it doesn't happen. There's a lot of information that could be given to people coming from abroad to marry or on fiancé visas. There could be a lot more proactivity about what information you could empower someone with to understand the context of what the options are in this country, and very specifically about an individual. So there's a lot of joining up that would need to happen, but it doesn't happen, frankly. And I would agree with what you've just tried to show with Vicky, that when you talk to people, as I have done in roundtables in the last year and before in my own frontline roles in domestic abuse, what you hear are lots and lots of missed opportunities where people have maybe slightly interacted with someone who could have told them about services, but maybe didn't understand the situation. And it takes years. A lot of times health professionals, we haven't highlighted them, very often will be the person who's spotted injuries, who've said, actually, we need to, signpost you to help and support. So we have a lot to do to think very carefully about the points we have opportunities, and to actually not just think, well, is that something we could do or would be nice to do, but that we must do. We have to build in these processes. We know that that at some points there'll be mandatory information that has to be given or done in immigration processes. So why are we not thinking from end to end in terms of what information could be passed along? It wouldn't solve absolutely everything because those barriers are so intimidating often, but I think that it would help. And I just have to, I have to go back to the firewall and just to state, in case it's not been clear, I really was disappointed in the government's decision about not taking on board the idea of the firewall as it was recommended and through the super complaint, which I'm sure you'll hear in the next panel, because the clarity that Vicky talked about is so important. People who are highly vulnerable, who are operating with a lot of challenges in terms of understanding the context, they really need to know very clearly, is there going to be a negative consequence to this help seeking or not? There are people who would worry about seeing a health provider for reasons of worrying about immigration enforcement. There's a lot of obstacles that we would say, well, on the face of it, that shouldn't happen. Well, it doesn't really matter what should or shouldn't happen. It's what's in the mind of the victim and the obstacles in that person's mind that we have to think of as our starting point.
I guess just one more point, please, Chair. I guess, Nicole, I'll come back to you. When these women do come from other countries, they're sort of sold a dream when they get in here, and they think it's going to be a bed of roses. So there should be some warnings somewhere along the process, right at the beginning, I think, when they're applying to come. This may happen, or not to scare people to death, obviously, but there should be some sort of warning there, or provide a network of support once they get here if they do fall into difficulty.
Can I just say, come back to your original question? The other thing that I missed out is that we actually work with Greater Manchester Independent Choices, and they have a community language line, which is, is restricted by the amount of funding, but quite often women who don't have English as a first language are able to use that helpline as well. So more funding for multilingual helplines, and also training on women's rights. I agree, women should be told when they come to this country what their rights are.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for coming along, and sorry I missed the start of the session. I was at another committee. Can I ask you both about the Istanbul Convention? And obviously there's been quite a lot of discussion and debate around the reservation that the government has made in relation to migrant victims and survivors. What are your views on the reasons that the government has offered for that, and on the reservation itself? Maybe start with you, Vicky.
I would be guessing, but I think it's. We were so excited that they'd ratified the Istanbul Convention, but when we find out with the Reservation 59, it was just more of the same. I think it's some sort of. It's again mixing immigration with domestic violence safety for women. And until the domestic violence can be seen as a safety issue and not an immigration issue or a safety issue first, then I think the domestic abuse bill that went through, and the same as the Istanbul Convention, left out migrant women. That's all I want to say really on that.
I think it's as much as you want to celebrate ratifying, but having that reservation in place does show, it illustrates what we've been talking about today. It had to be in place, essentially, because we don't have the provision of support for migrant survivors in place. You couldn't possibly be adhering to the convention unless that reservation was at least highlighted and conceded. And I think some of the things that we're talking about today could bring us into a space where that reservation wouldn't have to be needed. And it would be about looking at what are the practical ways in the here and now that you could help and allow people to know what their rights are or what possibilities are, but also what are the services that need to be enhanced and supported, and what are potentially decisions that need to be made about opening up greater options. And then that would unlock, there would be no need for reservation in my view, but it does hold back a fully fledged celebration, I'm afraid.
So it's interesting that you've sort of seen this in from the point of view of it not being possible to comply with the convention unless that reservation is in place. If the Home Office were here, I suspect they would be saying, well, we're looking into this, we've got pilots happening, we're doing some research, and hopefully it will not be required for too much longer. I hope that's what they would say. But you think it's just time to get a move on, to put ourselves in a position to make sure that reservation can be lifted? That's
right. It's time to get a move on to have a permanent solution. You'll hear from the amazing services who've been, and I think some of, Safety for Sisters has benefited from that migrant survivors pilot. But it is quite limited. It's, year-on-year funding. Hanana Siddiqui will tell you more in the next panel. My understanding is that it is enough funding to roughly support 450 people, whereas the estimates are obviously higher than that. So to have kind of a piecemeal approach doesn't bring us into line with the Istanbul Convention, and so we just have to have something more sustainable, more planned, and that is perfectly reasonable and a perfectly reasonable, practical way forward. And I think we now need to just accept that we're probably spending more time talking about the nuances of these things, fighting about short-term pilots and investing in very short-term solutions. And we need to now just shift to a long-term view of this is exactly how we'll handle this. Other countries are doing this. There's no reason why we shouldn't be moving in that direction.
Commissioner, can I also ask you a slightly different issue now, but it's about the idea of a working definition of immigration abuse. And so what difference do you think introducing that working definition would make in policies and guidance in relation to VOG?
I like the idea of having more of a defined working definition so that it just elevates a little bit of the status in one's mind of the kinds of patterns and coercion and control that a perpetrator would use in this context. So being able, the statutory guidance for the Domestic Abuse Act actually describes immigration abuse quite well. I mean, it describes the whole range of things that we've talked about today. But it doesn't really use that term. And I think if we could use that term and understand collectively what we mean by that, then it helps to build much more of a platform of training, capacity building, just general recognition that would move us forward. Keeping in mind that one of the big obstacles we've talked about today is when frontline services of all kinds misunderstand what's happening. And so it just does show that we need to invest so much more in allowing people not only to put some provision in place, but also allow people a greater understanding of how this is used and how prevalent it is. And even, the range of people who may suffer immigration abuse because they're operating on misunderstandings about their own status, for example. So I just think it just gives a definition and a status to what we see happening in a significant minority of people, but causing years and years of people being isolated and not seeking support and not getting the help that they need.
And just very finally, Dan Abbott touched upon the issue of victims of modern slavery, and I might be taking you into somebody else's remit, but I think I'm right in saying we're still without an anti-slavery commissioner just now. So if you can't answer this, fine, but do you think there has been an improvement in the police response to victims of modern slavery in particular coming forward? And also, do you have any hopes, aspirations, or indeed fears about the promised modern slavery bill that may be forthcoming?
I have to say I don't have a very formed view about the bill, but I would say that there is to some degree a bit of overlap. But I would just caution too much under overlap in thinking that this group of people who you might be defined as victims of modern slavery with a whole host of other options that may well need improving. There could be a tiny overlap there where there's a relationship involved which would bring them into kind of the territory of domestic abuse. But I think sometimes we kind of can over-exaggerate that and forget that kind of is a way of dismissing, well, there's these options for victims of modern slavery as if those are that could help some of the people Vicky sees. And I just simply don't think that's the case. And in terms of police response, I'm the first to say that, of course, there are many, many people doing the very best they can, but I think across the board in all of these issues, the response is quite patchy, and I'm on record saying, I just think we cannot tolerate that any longer. We have to have a more consistent approach, more clear expectations from force to force, exactly what should be happening for these most vulnerable victims.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one last question, which is about the destitution domestic violence concession. I just wondered, Nicole, do you support that being extended from 3 months to 6 months?
Certainly. I mean, I think most people I've ever talked to, and my own experience tells me this, that 3 months is not long enough, that things are not sorted out within 3 months for all hosts of reasons, and that we really need to see that extended. And then, of course, what you'll see in a report coming to you is that I think that one very practical solution is to consider how we can extend that concession for other visa categories, and I think that would get us very far ahead of some of the problems we've heard about today.
Well, can I, on behalf of the committee, thank you both for your time this morning. It's been really very interesting to hear from both of you. Can I particularly, on behalf of the committee, say to you, Vicky, that we really want to thank you and all your colleagues for the amazing work that you do in your organisation, and we're certainly very grateful that you found time to come and talk to us today, and we really have appreciated your insight. And again, thank you.
Totally agree. I thought these two women absolutely fantastic. When I was, the couple of things I just picked up on there was just lack of funding. What a shocker! And after 12 years of Tory rule, funding, having to beg, borrow, and steal cash to do something that's fundamentally very important, isn't it? It was just maddening that having to beg, borrow, and steal. Yeah, totally agree. 1 inch punch bowl. That was a giggle. An eye-opener, wasn't it? I'm buying a pig farm. People are going missing. Oh dear. But yeah, what do you guys think? As I say, I just found it absolutely fascinating. As listening to what these fantastic ladies do, it's just eye-opening. And some of the stories, Tories, I've got the Tories on my bloody helmet. Yeah, totally agree, Audrey. Heartbreaking. Yeah, shocking. Don't get confused with who you are feeding to who. Yeah. I've got these are shambles. Yeah. What's wrong with these Tory pillocks? I think it's just. I just find it odd why you'd want to be a Tory, especially, and even a working class Tory. I just don't get it. But I just found that absolutely heartbreaking. So that story about that Nigerian young. Get it together. I'm gonna break down and do an Oscar-winning performance, emotional scene. I'll try and keep myself from crying. But yeah, I just found that fascinating. Yes. Yeah, I think you might have also there. It's just the upbringing. It's in a toxic culture. I think very much in agreement there. Because like one thing I picked up, remember when we did the DWP cross-party selection? The one thing Chloe Smith, I think that she just sounded like all about figures and all that. No emotion to anything she has to say. So, and I think that's similar to them, you know. But yeah, I just found that absolutely heartbreaking. Well, I might. Is DB going to go full rage and wreck 10 Downing Street? Well, I might just give their front door a right good whacking with my cane. Yeah, the story was, especially that talks about that, was it Nigerian woman? Yeah, we all would love to do the same, take them in, you know, give them some safety and hope. Rest their souls, just to belong and to have some power and influence. Yeah, that's can't really argue with that. But yeah, I just found all that heartbreaking. Right. Just out of interest, what time does Max's stream start? Is it 8:15 or something like that? I said, no love, heartless. Yes, sent off to boarding school. That's yes, and yes, I've heard so many harrowing stories about kids going to boarding school, and you just think, I'd never do that to my kids. That's just is it 8:30ish? Right. So yeah, so we've got at least an hour to kill. Yes, yeah, good night, Audrey, and thanks for stopping by, and hopefully see you again. And take care. I'm out of steel again. I can feel the rage burning. I remember the last time you were losing your marbles in one of these live streams. Duke Vengeance. So, yes, no worries. I understood what you meant there, Audrey. Love and light to you as well, and take care. And hopefully speak to you soon. Because, I suppose, I was going to see if there's something we can do till about 8ish, you know. Maybe I'll have a little look on what's... Let's see if we can get this. Right. So I'll just be fiddling about with a bit of a new with a bit of a new don't know why I don't seem to work, but you take care, nod Selassie. Have a good evening. I'm just going to see if I can work this out. This is my little bit of a new thing for my live stream, because what I tend to do is I like to have a few funny videos on my Twitter feed and show them off for a bit of a good giggle. So let's see if I can work this out. I probably won't. I'll probably die as usual. But right. Can we talk local politics? Well, it's up to you. What do you have in mind, curating it for? Also, I saw your message. Up the fucking chickens. Get in there. Yes. Yeah, so what do you have in mind? Local politics, where everyone's from. Yeah. Germany. See if I can get this sorted. Well, give me a quick minute. Let's say that's my... So that's my Twitter feed, like. But I like to have a bit of fun. I can't quite understand why my camera's not working properly. But we can, have a bit of fun for half an hour, mate. Let's have a look at Oh, what an idiot this guy is. This is... Oops. I'll say we've got half an hour. We get a bit of light, just like listen to them harrowing stories where, can be a bit, this is what happens when you stick your head in places you shouldn't. Oh dear. Well, that's what happens when you stick your head in places you shouldn't be. I'm just right. Let's see if we can. I'm here. Right, we're all sorted. German Health Minister starting to stir the COVID shit again, Ben. Yes, I noticed Graham Hughes did a show yesterday. I'll say I was doing a few other things, so here you go, number 3. Take care, see you soon, and have fun. Yeah, we can just... It's one of my personal favourites. You always get the certain one who just decides that when they're on holiday, they're just going to take over in everything, every aspect of the holiday. Yes. Nice lovely looking pool. Oops. Nice, lovely look. Yeah, well, proper livid, won't it? That's what happens when you stick your head in places that shouldn't go there. Yes. Oh, yes. Let's just check the water. Let's just check. Oh, yes, that's lovely. Quick dip. Do the backstroke, or whatever stroke. And thanks for the sun lounger. Cheers, mate. So funny. Cheeky little so-and-so. Clearly, the dog ain't impressed. Yeah. Yeah. Just thinking, hey, I just put my towel there. That's my lounger. On your feet, lose your seat. Absolutely. Well, yeah, they are like dogs, aren't they? Oh yes. Beautiful, pure fluffy love.
What?
Brilliant. Oh dear. Poor lad. He's only trying to help. Dear me. Yeah, I wish my dog was that chilled and all. It was out 5 hours today. He's back out again. Yeah, well, our dog, she's 14 now, like, and, oh, God. Even now, she still has a... It must be the terrier thing. Because she does have a 5-minute mad rush around the house. Mad as a box of frogs. Oh, this is funny. Now, we all got to be serious here, because serious money was pushed out for this bet.
$20. He owe me $20.
Why the $20?
$20.
He bet you $20. Come on, baby.
Serious money.
Let me see what you got, right?
Ready?
Say you go hit it one time, or?
One time.
When I first saw that, I never saw that coming. Yeah, I love terriers as well, Ben. Ours is a Patterdale. Oh, talk about mad as a box of frogs. But, oh dear. Malinois. Yeah, we've got a friend who, I'm sure, said she said, got a Malinois. Lovely. Birthday cake. I have to make her a new one. Oh dear. Oh no. A certain Blitz Baron von Numpty is in the naughty box. He jumped on my daughter's birthday cake. Have to make her a new one. Oh dear. Will the puppy dog eyes work on you? And let the little numpty off. You know, when it comes to dogs, you know, they realise they've got it wrong and made a horrendous ricket, and they put on the puppy dog eyes. Oh, this just goes. Starts off with trying to be all romantic, and then it just disappears. Turns to shit.
如果不是亲眼所见，我是万万不敢相信的。
Oh dear, she took no prisoners at end, did she? She weren't happy. Oh. Never miss. Never. Quite clearly, someone's got the force. You go get him. No messing. Can I just say, if anyone's about to take a drink of hot tea and put it down. Told you to put your drink down. You know, you have one of the moments where you make a horrendous ricket and you just try to pretend that nothing to see here.
Whoa, clean man, motherfucker.
I love the cartoon. Strangely enough, so did I a little bit. You know, you sort of like reactions when you see someone going like that. So you're not on your own. I did first time. Now when it comes to exercising, forget all your then you just style it out well. Now, when it comes to all your exercise bikes and your running thing, whatever you call them, don't need them. Just need ice.
Oh my god, dude, that party was so... Oh, I almost just kicked that rock. I'm not gonna fall.
I watched and think, how long is he going to be? I thought, he did well to stay on his feet as long as he did. Oh, dear. Now, when you look at that, you think, what are you doing? There's only one way. Yeah, fantastic dancer. There's only one way this is going to go. What a bell tap. Oh, don't be doing this to me tonight. Well, I think you get the gist of what happened.
It's broke.
Well, stop being a bell tap then.
It's broke.
Yeah, exactly. Duke McKen, vengeance. You got a tit. Yeah, exactly. Then what are you doing? Like it says in the thing. Well, yeah, exactly. It says, is there something? There is something called a workbench, you know. I absolutely think, what are you doing, you complete prat? Oh, this is sure. This would be the sort of thing I'd have probably done in my youth. Always one idiot, you know. Prank goes wrong. Well, I have no sympathy for the lad. You get everything you deserve. What an idiot. Dear. Clearly this guy thought all his birthdays came at once.
Una dirección más o menos de que queda que me dijeron que por acá, ¿ves? No sé más o menos dónde que sí.
Más o menos, dime más o menos cómo
no
la
sé, yo no sé qué
Allá arriba está el palito que él.
El palo. Ah, pero por allá.
Sí, mi vida.
Gracias, mi amor, gracias. Bueno.
Dios mío, señor,
Hey, so, yes, this is my day. Oh, dear. Oh, yes. This is clearly somebody's birthday, but they're only going to get a little bit of the cake.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Jayabin. Happy birthday
Happy birthday.
Always got to keep your eye on the cake in them situations. Oh no. Clearly the wife isn't happy. And in that situation, always make sure you know where the wife is, because she's liable to knock 10 bells out of you. This is priceless. Clearly needs to be more worried about his shoes than the bottom of his pants.
I don't know how I'm going to get across. I'm going to get my... Look, my trousers are getting dirty. Look at the state of my feet. I've got to try and get over there.
Clearly got zero sympathy. Nobody showed him any sympathy whatsoever. Well, mate, when I first saw this, I thought, that's magnificent. That is brilliant. I was just when I first watched it, I just took my breath away. That is just magnificent. Absolutely beautiful. Another one of them, nothing to see here. Nothing happened, nothing to see here.
Yes.
Bet that hurt. That must have hurt. Oh, this is beautiful. Kind of, sort of thing I would have done if my kids were that age.
لالایی کن مرغک من دنیا فسانه لالایی کن مرغک من دنیا فسانه هر ناله شبگیر این گیتار محزون عشق هزاران مرغک بی آشیانه
Timing impeccable there, the little fella. So, how this young lady decides to go for a jog, and she gets a few friends to run with her. It's sort of like Forrest Gump, but slightly different. Hello, Karen Douglas. Hope you're well. Yeah, I thought it was sweet watching them follow her go for a jog. Give her moral support. Now, this is... I don't know about you. See you for now, K8 1984. Have a good one. This is a normal everyday occurrence. Well, is it? Pram's on fire.
The fuck are you doing? What are you doing?
Fire.
A wee fire?
You're a boy.
Clearly I'm missing something, but something that's not really I've ever seen in my estate. But how very odd. Oh, there's a little happy dog. Oh, I found that fascinating. It's not the first time I've heard this. At one of Trump's rallies, there's hardly anybody there.
Enough is enough. Their lack of leadership, failed policies, and attempts to divide us all have left our state and our country in a worse state than I've ever seen in my lifetime. We must stand up and fight against these.
Now that might be very early on, but it's not. It's not the first time I've heard this. Where got me thinking of Ronnie Pickering. Who's Ronnie Pickering? Oh yes. Clearly, this bunny's got the right attitude. Just chill. Oh, nom 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 nom. Oops. Oh, I don't know if you've ever. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Any of these? These are just brilliant. Right, it's just been taking the rise out of, the whole situation with the death of the Queen, where it's just been an absolute incessant mourn fest, where it comes to the point where these presenters have run out of things to say.
And we can see the King now being driven into the palace, Buckingham Palace in London, England. And one only has to look at the size of the crowds to really get a sense of the scale of the occasion. It's like Beatlemania, the Beatlemania of the 1960s that we remember. This is the Beatlemania of the now, but it's not like Beatlemania. It's a sad Beatlemania, because while we're happy to have a king, we must remember we've lost our queen, Elizabeth II. If you've just joined us, we're in day 10 of our national grief-o-rama. We're all handling it in different ways. I myself, I've written a song for the Queen that I'd like to play for you now. Oh, the Queen, you're a very lovely lady, but you're dead now, and we're all very sad about that.
I've seen a few of it, they're just brilliant. just bury her already. Yeah. It's just been This is Tommy Little, yeah. I couldn't think of his name, yeah. This is Tommy Little, he goes by. You should watch some of his stuff. He's absolutely brilliant. I think Max covered this about this guy. Yeah, a man sells his nappy after being asked a question. What an idiot. Got all this because like they've just been taken around. Some of this stuff is quality.
So you've all just seen it. What did you think? Oh my god, it was just amazing, wasn't it, guys? We really enjoyed it. I mean, some bits were quite tense. There's one bit where an old guy keeled over and crumpled into a beefeater's crotch, but that was followed by a beautiful scene where a guy further back in the queue appeared and, as if from nowhere, produced a chair. I whispered to him that you probably could have done with that about 8 fucking hours ago, mate. But the lighting was spectacular, and the stereo surround sound was just amazing. I mean, you couldn't actually hear any sound; it was just shuffling. But it's like total 360. It was just so atmospheric. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, the only thing we did here was a 2-litre bottle of Evian filled with piss hit the floor. But that was us. Yes, it was. It was your fault. The bottle top wasn't even on properly. We took some 3D glasses with us that we had left over from Legoland a few years ago, and when we put those on, wasn't it? It was just a totally different experience. It's like you could reach out and actually touch the coffin as if it was actually there. It was a total game changer. How many stars, guys? I think we're in agreement, aren't we? 5 stars together. 5 stars together. 5 stars. Yeah, no, we had a great time, and I think we're all going to get to the back of the queue. It'll take us a few hours to get there, but we're going again. So you...
I've seen a few of these where they're just proper, just take their... Oh, this young lady's brilliant. Talk about a fantastic Liz Truss impersonation. When you hear her speak, she just sounds on the button. Probably seen it on YouTube. This is better just for...
We need to tax all of the rich people because otherwise the poor people will have a hard time this winter in the energy crisis and won't be able to heat their homes. I know everything because I am the head of Labour. Ooh, look at my arm. Look what I can do. I'm a patronising plastic patriot. Yeah, look at me, I'm Keir Starmer and I can do the splits. Ooh, look at me and my splits. Order, no splits in the house, no splits in the house. Will you please pay attention to our Prime Minister because she's new. Okay, you're right, honourable gentleman. No, Boris, no, you're not Prime Minister anymore. Know your place. If it's about trains, send them to the Transport Secretary. If it's about the NHS, send them to the Health Secretary. If it's about schools, send them to the Education Secretary. What do I do?
Yeah.
Which hat should I wear for morning? No. Too formal. Perfect. Who runs the world, Liv? Who runs this world? I do. I run the world, not you, Rishi.
I don't think she's absolutely brilliant. Top class. I found this absolutely fascinating. I think after this one we'll probably call it a day. It's nearly enough 80 cut. But it shows this where the UK, one of the greatest trading nations in the world, until about 2016, global shite show, Brexit reality. And I wonder what happened around that time. I found that fascinating. Fifth at that time. Still fifth, 90s. Even went up to fourth in the largest exporters. China there, they're absolutely I know we hit it in 2015. What's happened there? Jesus Christ. We finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11th. Wow. Oops. Shut it. That's just shows you. Oh, we'll leave on this one. This is brilliant. Running opposite directions, see who your dog loves the most. Poor dog. Poor dog. Don't know what to do. Poor dog. Absolutely. Oh dear. Right. I do hope you enjoyed tonight. It's like the first time when you watched that cross-party select committee. Some of them stories, they were harrowing, and it just gave you some insights. But them two ladies that were doing all that, would be interested to see export figures per capita. Yeah, that would be interesting and all. Very interesting. They keep all the money with investment back anyway. Yeah, probably do. But anyway, I just thought I'd put. But after that finished that, still have about half an hour-ish to kill that. Can't go leave here feeling a bit down and depressed. Needed something to cheer us up. So hopefully I've put you in the mood for Max's excellent channel live stream later on. So I just want to thank you all for coming on, and do hope you enjoyed yourself. And I'll leave this live stream here and just bid you farewell, and just take care.